All right, let's jump right in. We're about to look at a world that, well, it almost disappeared completely. A history that was very nearly erased from existence. And the only reason we know about it? It all comes down to one single manuscript from a way back in 1604. It's like a snapshot taken just moments before everything changed.
I mean, think about that for a second. It's a heavy question, right? And this wasn't some thought experiment. For a very old, very established community in South India, this was their reality. Imagine, your sacred books are being thrown into bonfires. Your oldest traditions are suddenly illegal. What do you do? How do you possibly save your entire culture from being wiped out? Well, the answer, and you're not going to believe this, comes from a single document. It's sitting in the British Library right now with the very official-sounding name Additional MS 9853. But it's known as the Relation da Serra, which basically means the report on the mountains. And this report, it's our only real window into this world that was on the verge of being lost forever. Yeah, the best way to think about this manuscript is as a time capsule. Seriously, it was created at this absolute crisis point, a very conscious effort to write everything down before it just vanished. So let's crack it open and see what's inside. Okay, so first things first. The title says Serra. What does that mean? It's just the Portuguese word for mountains, and it's talking about this hilly inland area on the Malabar coast that's in southwest India. And this wasn't just some random place. For more than a millennium, this was the heartland, the stronghold, of this incredibly unique Christian community. And get this, the report was written in 1604. That's only 5 years after a huge cultural catastrophe hit them. The entire point of writing it was to gather up all the oral stories, the sagas, the traditions of what was called the Christianity of the mountains, to get it all on paper before it was gone for good. So who were these mountain Christians? I mean, who are we actually talking about here? It's crucial to understand these weren't people who had just converted. No, this was an ancient community. Their history goes all the way back, and I mean all the way back, to the earliest days of Christianity itself. Okay, just look at this timeline. The sheer scale of it is mind-blowing. Tradition says that St. Thomas the Apostle, yes, that St. Thomas, showed up there in 52 AD. 52! That's centuries, literally centuries before Christianity got a real foothold in most of Europe. So when you see Vasco da Gama arriving in 1498, that's not the start of their story. It's a massive interruption to a story that's already 1,400 years old. This is what made them so unique, this dual identity they had. On the one hand, they were completely Indian in their day-to-day lives. They had this high caste status, right on par with the Nair warrior aristocracy. But on the other hand, their faith was Syrian. Their holy language was classical Syriac, and they looked to the ancient Church of the East, way over in Mesopotamia, for their spiritual leadership. It's a fascinating blend. And this table just lays it all out. Their high status wasn't just talk. We're talking about 72 specific privileges given to them by local kings. And these were real, tangible perks, things like being allowed to build big, 2-story houses, which was a huge deal back then. They had tax exemptions. They even had equal standing with the warrior class in those super complex social rules. They were, without a doubt, a powerful and deeply respected pillar of Malabar society. So you have this ancient, stable, prosperous community, and then everything changes. A new power arrives from overseas, and they have a completely different way of seeing the world. And they looked at this unique, blended culture not as something to learn from or respect, but as a problem, something that needed to be fixed. And the tool they used for this fixing was something called the Padrado. You can think of it as a deal, basically, between the Pope and the King of Portugal. It gave the Portuguese Empire total authority over all the churches in any new territories they controlled. And the mission statement was crystal clear: get everyone in line with the practices and authority of the Roman Catholic Church. No exceptions. This all came to a head in 1599 as something called the Synod of Diamper. This was basically a forced assembly. The community leaders were gathered together and forced to sever their ancient connection to the Church of the East. Their own traditions were suddenly labeled heretical. And here's the most tragic part. All of their ancient books, their priceless manuscripts, were ordered to be rounded up and destroyed, burned. The before and after here is just stark. It was a total upheaval. Before this synod, the community was led by their own guy, an archdeacon, who wasn't just a religious figure. He was a powerful political and military leader too.
After, they were forced under the thumb of foreign Latin bishops. Their independence was gone, their heritage was officially condemned. It was, and there's no other word for it, a cultural catastrophe.
So, with their books being burned and their history being erased, who could possibly save it? Well, here comes the great irony of this whole story. The person who ends up saving it is the most unlikely savior you could ever imagine. It was the very guy whose job it was to enforce all these destructive new rules. His name was Francisco Rose. He was a Spanish Jesuit. And the real kicker? He was appointed to be the community's very first Latin archbishop. So he was the living, breathing symbol of this whole new order, of this forced takeover. And Raz himself was just a bundle of contradictions. On the one hand, yeah, he was an agent of the Portuguese crown. His job was to enforce the synod's decrees. But, on the other hand, he was a genuine, brilliant scholar. He had taken the time to master not just Syriac, but the local languages too. And it was that scholarly curiosity, that part of him, that compelled him to start writing down in meticulous detail the very culture he was technically supposed to be stamping out. And that single act of documentation is the true legacy of his report. It's because of Ross, the enforcer, that we have this incredibly detailed picture of the community right at that moment of crisis, just as their entire world was being flipped on its head. So you see, this document, this Relação da Serra, it wasn't just some administrative report he was filing. It's been called a historiographic corrective. That's a fancy way of saying Rose knew what was happening. He saw the oral histories and ancient traditions being wiped out, and he made a deliberate decision to record them before they were gone forever. And just look at the kind of stuff he saved. The oral legends about St. Thomas himself, the details of these ancient royal grants inscribed on copper plates, which were like their Magna Carta, their proof of rights, the history of their own leaders, the archdeacons, even their vital role in the international pepper trade. I mean, so much of what we understand about their life before the Portuguese showed up is thanks entirely to this one report. This quote just sums it up perfectly. In his own mind, he was probably just recording what he saw as fables and local traditions that needed to be understood to be corrected. But in doing so, he accidentally became the single most important preserver of their culture. He saved an entire community's voice from being completely silenced. So, in the end, the Relação da Serra is so much more than a historical report. It's a vessel, it's like an ark that carried a whole history through a flood of destruction. It gives us this unbelievably rare peek into a fascinating world right at its most tragic and pivotal moment. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? This one manuscript, written by the most unlikely person, saved the memory of a culture that was nearly 2,000 years old. Which just begs the question, how many other histories, how many entire worlds weren't so fortunate? How much have we already lost to time without even knowing it?